The stack of papers hit my chest before I even had a chance to brace myself, and the sound of them scattering across the sweat-soaked canvas is something I will never forget. My own brother had just thrown a deed at me like I was a stray dog that needed to be chased off his porch. I did not flinch. I did not step back, and neither one of them, not my brother, not his wife, had any idea what they had just woken up inside me. My name is Rosalind Cade, though everyone who has ever mattered to me just calls me Roz. I grew up in a cracked little town in southern Ohio, the kind of place where the steel mills went quiet decades ago and never started back up. I am 34 years old, and until that humid July night, I thought the worst battles of my life were already behind me. I was wrong. The war that almost took everything I had left was waiting for me inside my own family, and it started with a house. That house belonged to my grandfather. He built it with his own 2 hands back when the mill still ran 3 shifts a day, and when he passed, it became the only steady thing in a life that had never given me much steadiness at all. I grew up watching my father drink away every paycheck he ever earned, and I grew up watching my little brother Dean learn how to disappear into video games and borrowed shoes so he would not have to see what our father became after dark. I was the one who held things together. I always was. When Dean and I were kids, I used to skip lunch so I could save up enough to buy him sneakers, because our father never seemed to remember that growing boys need new shoes twice a year. I told myself it did not matter, that being the older sister meant carrying weight so he never had to. I never once regretted it, not even when I grew into a woman who had far more scars than comfort. What I did not expect was that the boy I raised on borrowed lunch money would grow into a man willing to break my jaw over square footage. 5 years before that night in the gym, I left Ohio and took a job overseas, the kind of job that does not show up on resumes and does not come with a pension. I will not go into the details of what I did over there, only that I came home with a body full of scars and a mind that had been trained to survive in rooms where nobody was coming to save me. Every single dollar I earned during those years, I wired straight back home, into an account meant to keep the bank from foreclosing on my father's house before he drank his way into losing it completely. I paid off that house with my own blood, long before I ever paid it off with money. So when my phone buzzed that afternoon while I was on my knees repairing the porch, and I saw a message from my brother's wife, Kayla, telling me to bring the deed to Dean's gym, because an appraiser was coming in the morning, something inside me went very still. She wrote that if I fought them on it, they would call the police and have my things thrown out onto the curb like garbage. I read that message twice. I did not type a single word back. I simply set the phone down on the damp porch boards and stared at the crack running through the screen, thinking about how a person can spend their whole life protecting someone only to be discarded by them in one afternoon. I want you to understand what that house meant to me before I tell you what happened next. It was not just wood and nails and a leaking roof. It was the only place on earth where I could close my eyes at night without seeing the things I had seen. There was proof that some part of my life had not been destroyed. And my own brother, the boy I once sacrificed my lunches for, wanted to sell it out from under me so he could finance a brand new truck, and so his wife could keep her nails done every 2 weeks. That kind of betrayal does not make you cry. It makes you go cold. I did not sit there and grieve. I stood up, my bad knee cracking loudly in the quiet yard, and I walked to the side of the house where the garden hose was coiled against the siding. I twisted the spigot and let freezing water blast straight into my face, washing away the sawdust and the heat and whatever softness might have still been clinging to me. I breathed in slow 4 counts in, 4 counts held, 4 counts out, the same breathing I had learned in places where panic could get you killed. By the time I turned that water off, I was not a grieving sister anymore. I was something else entirely, something my brother had never once had to meet. I did not bother changing out of my wet clothes. I grabbed my truck keys off the porch railing and climbed into my old Ford, and the 20-minute drive to the gym passed in complete silence. I drove past the rusted shell of the old steel plant, past boarded-up storefronts that used to be somebody's dream, and the emptiness of that town matched the hollow feeling opening up in my chest. My knuckles went white against the cracked steering wheel. I was not thinking about what I would say to my brother. I was thinking about the version of him I used to know, and wondering exactly when he had died, and been replaced by whoever sent that text through his wife. The gym was called Ironclad, a name Dean had picked out himself because he thought it sounded tough. The red neon sign flickered over the entrance, washing the parking lot in a bloody-looking glow. I pushed through the heavy glass door, and the noise hit me like a wall. Fast thumping through cheap ceiling tiles, the rhythmic slap of gloves against heavy bags, the smell of sweat and energy drinks thick enough to choke on. I stood just inside the doorway and let my eyes sweep the room out of pure habit, counting exits, counting bodies, cataloguing the space the way I had been trained to do in places where a wrong step could cost you your life. An old man named Walt was mopping near the ring, leaning heavily on the handle with a brace wrapped around one knee. He looked up and caught my eye, and something passed between us without either of us saying a word. Walt was the only person in that entire building who had any idea what I had actually survived overseas, and the second he saw my face, his shoulders sagged. He knew exactly what kind of storm had just walked through that door, and he knew there was nothing he could do to stop it. I pushed through a cluster of tattooed men gathered around the free weights, ignoring the low whistles aimed at my dirt-stained jeans and oversized jacket. Dean was up in the elevated ring, bouncing on his toes and throwing shadow punches, his white hand wraps bright under the fluorescent lights. Kayla leaned against the ring post below him, chewing gum loudly, thumbs flying across her phone screen like the rest of the world did not exist. The moment Dean spotted me, he stopped bouncing. He dropped his hands, jerked his chin toward Walt, and the music cut off so suddenly the silence felt like a slap. Dean grabbed the thick stack of papers sitting on the turnbuckle and did not wait for me to say a single word. He hurled it straight at my chest, the staples scraping across my collarbone, as the pages burst apart and fluttered down into the puddles of his own sweat on the mat. He screamed at me, calling me a washed-up, useless woman, telling me to sign the papers or he would break my jaw right there in front of everyone. Kayla did not even glance up from her phone. She just muttered that I should roll over and accept being homeless before my brittle old bones ended up picking up my own teeth off the floor. I stood completely still. The industrial fan blew across my face, and I looked down at the page resting near the toe of my boot. Deed of transfer, it read, in plain black letters. My mind dragged me backward without permission, back to a scorching transport truck somewhere on the other side of the world, back to the taste of dust in my throat and a crumpled wire transfer receipt folded against my chest. $50,000. Every cent of it sent home to save a father who never once thanked me for it, so that one day his son could try to sell the roof out from under his own sister to buy a lifted truck. I did not argue. I did not waste a single breath defending myself to a man who had already decided I was worthless. I reached up, grabbed the zipper of my jacket, and pulled it down slow. I let the fabric drop to the concrete floor, and the murmuring in the gym died instantly. Every eye in that room locked onto the scars wrapping around my shoulders, the burns crawling up the side of my neck, the kind of marks that do not come from falling off a porch ladder. I was not just somebody's overlooked older sister anymore. Fernand Walt's jaw tightened because he understood exactly what was waking up in front of him. I climbed into the ring the same clumsy way an exhausted, aging woman would, dragging one stiff leg over the ropes and then the other, my bad knee popping loudly enough for the whole room to hear. Kayla's friend snickered from ringside, and I heard the sharp click of a phone camera capturing what she thought was going to be my humiliation. Across the canvas, Dean smacked his gloves together, showing off for his buddies, his neck thick and shining with sweat and cheap lotion. He was performing. He wanted an audience for what he thought was about to be an easy, one-sided beating. I bent down near the corner and untied my work boots, setting them outside the ropes with careful precision. My bare feet touched the sticky canvas, and I looked down at them. A roadmap of every hard year I had survived, thick calluses, jagged scars along my ankle, raised tissue that ached whenever the weather turned. I had paid for my family's survival with my own skin, piece by piece, and none of them had ever noticed or cared. Then I looked across the ring at my brother's feet, clean and soft above his expensive boxing shoes, the feet of a boy who had only ever fought inside padded rooms with a referee standing by to save him. Walt climbed through the ropes carrying the crumpled deed, stepping between us with his bad knee dragging slightly. He set the rules in a low, rough voice: 3 minutes, knockout or tap, and he told Dean not to do anything stupid. though his tired eyes kept flicking toward me the entire time, silently begging me to stand down. Dean spat onto the mat and told him to get out of the way, that no sister of his belonged in that ring. I did not react to any of it. I closed my mouth, pulled a slow breath through my nose, and shut down every soft part of myself that still remembered him as a little boy asking me to read him a bedtime story. I let my hands hang loose at my sides, instead of raising them into any kind of guard. I tucked my chin down against my collarbone to protect my throat, and I fixed my eyes not on his face or his gloves, but on the waistband of his shorts, because where the hips travel, the rest of the body always follows. I asked Walt to ring the bell and my voice came out flat, carrying no fear and no anger at all, just a kind of cold certainty that seemed to unsettle the entire room. The second that bell rang, Dean charged like a runaway truck. No jab to measure distance, no circling. Just 210 pounds of blind rage aimed straight at my face. He wanted this finished in seconds, wanted to knock his older sister unconscious so he could flex for his friends and hear his wife cheer his name. He planted his lead foot and swung a massive overhand right with every ounce of his weight behind it. A punch meant to end things instantly. I did not step back. I did not slip to the side the way they teach in air-conditioned gyms with padded floors and soft rules. When you learn to survive in places where stepping backward gets you killed, you stop running from impact and you learn to build a wall instead. I hunched my shoulders, buried my chin, and at the very last instant I tilted my head forward, presenting the hardest part of my skull directly into the path of his fist. The collision was deafening, a wet crack followed by the dry snap of something breaking that was not my jaw. The small bones in Dean's hand and wrist buckled under their own momentum, and he let out a high-pitched shriek, stumbling backward and clutching his ruined hand against his stomach. His face draining of every drop of color, I did not move an inch. A flash of white light exploded behind my own eyes, my brain rattling hard against my skull, and I tasted fresh blood where my teeth had clamped down on the inside of my cheek. I swallowed it, that metallic burn settling in my throat like a final confirmation. The brother I used to protect with everything I had was gone, replaced by a stranger willing to shatter my face over a down payment on a pickup truck. The pain in my head did something strange to me in that moment. It killed off whatever last fragile piece of loyalty I still carried for him. Through the ringing in my ears, an old memory surfaced. The raspy voice of a man who once taught me how to stay alive when the ground itself felt like it wanted to kill you. Make yourself small. Watch the hips. Break the foundation. I blinked the white spots out of my vision and lowered my chin again. Dean looked down at his swollen hand, then back up at me. And for one brief second, the shock in his eyes told me he finally understood he had not just punched a tired old woman. He had punched something closer to iron, but that understanding did not last. Humiliation swallowed it whole, and he let out a wet, guttural roar and lunged at me again, all technique abandoned, swinging wild. I did not raise my fists. I watched his shoulders instead, because a man swinging purely out of rage becomes a broken machine. His balance thrown too far forward, his chin lifted and exposed. I took one small step back, letting his glove slice through empty air, and when he loaded up a second wild uppercut, aimed at tearing my head off my shoulders, I simply pivoted and slid into the dead space beneath his raised arm. His fist hit nothing at all. 210 pounds of momentum had nowhere left to go, and as he stumbled past me, I placed both palms flat against his chest and shoved, using nothing but his own weight and gravity against him. He went airborne for a split second before slamming flat onto his back, the impact echoing through the gym like a shotgun blast, all the air forced violently from his lungs. The room went completely silent, except for the buzz of the overhead lights. I glanced toward the ropes and saw the smug smile frozen on Kayla's face, her phone slowly lowering from where she had been filming, certain she was about to catch her husband putting me in the hospital. I wiped a smear of blood from my lip with the back of my thumb and looked down at the golden boy who thought he could sell my life out from under me. Now gasping like a fish stranded on dry land, Dean rolled onto his side, coughing violently, his face a deep mottled purple as he fought to drag air back into his chest. When he finally looked up at me, whatever decency had still been flickering in his eyes was completely gone. He pushed himself up, Not into a boxing stance this time, but into a low, ugly crouch, and I understood immediately that the sport part of this had ended. What came next was not going to follow any rules at all. He came at me low, arms spread wide, aiming to wrap me up and crush me under his weight, certain that his size alone would be enough to break me and make me beg in front of his cheering wife. I did not brace against him. I took a small step back, just enough to open a pocket of empty space where my body used to be, and as he lunged past me, I clamped one hand around the back of his neck and hooked the other into the waistband of his shorts. I did not fight his strength. I simply redirected it, pulling his neck down and his hips forward, sending 210 pounds of momentum straight down into the plywood hidden beneath the thin canvas. His face hit the mat first, and a dark stream of blood immediately began pooling beneath his nose. He lay there stunned, gasping, and I stepped back and told him quietly that he had 2 minutes left. He pushed himself up on his good hand, blood smearing across his mouth, and this time when he came at me, there were no wild punches at all. He wrapped his thick forearms around the back of my neck like a barroom brawler and drove his knee straight into my exposed ribs with everything he had. A strike meant to finish me for good, so he could take the house key straight out of my pocket. The pain was blinding. A deep grinding crack that stole the air from my lungs and blurred the fluorescent lights above me into streaks. Kayla shrieked with laughter from ringside, clapping like she was watching a dog perform a trick, and that sound did something to me that the broken ribs alone could not. It unlocked a door in my mind that I had kept sealed shut for 5 long years. Suddenly, I was not standing in a humid Ohio gym anymore. I was somewhere else entirely, somewhere hesitation had always meant death, and my body responded the only way it had ever been trained to. I drove both thumbs hard into the soft hollow at the base of Dean's throat before he could load up a second knee strike. His eyes rolled back, his whole body convulsing as his airway choked shut, and his hands released my neck instantly, clawing helplessly at his own throat instead. I did not hesitate. I grabbed a fistful of his hair, drove my forearm across his jaw, swept his ankle out from under him, and we both went down hard onto the mat together. My broken ribs screamed with every movement, but I fed that pain straight into my grip and refused to let it slow me down. He thrashed beneath me, desperate and panicked, clawing at my arms hard enough to tear the skin open, but I stayed perfectly steady, breathing in that same slow 4-count rhythm I had learned years ago in a place that had nearly killed me. I slid my forearm across his throat, locked the grip tight, and cut off the blood flow to his brain completely. His kicks against the canvas grew weaker and weaker, his fingernails digging bloody lines down my forearms, and I pressed my forehead close to his ear and told him quietly that this was not a threat. It was simply biology, and that he had 3 seconds left before he understood exactly what that meant. His thrashing slowed. His face darkened into a deep bruised color, his eyes rolling back toward the ceiling, and just before he lost consciousness entirely, his hand rose weakly and tapped the mat 3 times. I let go instantly, without holding on a second longer than necessary, without gloating, without a single word of triumph. I stepped back and dropped to one knee near the turnbuckle, pressing my palm against my broken rib and pulling in short, ragged breaths, while Dean curled onto his side and sobbed into the canvas like a frightened child, blood and saliva hanging from his mouth. The gym stayed silent the entire time. The tattooed men who had been cheering moments earlier now pressed flat against the walls, too stunned to make a sound. Kayla stood frozen by the ropes, all the color drained from her face, her phone slipping unnoticed from her hand and clattering onto the concrete floor. Walt stepped forward slowly, his bad knee dragging, and without saying a word he picked up the scattered pages of the deed, tore them cleanly down the middle, and handed the torn pieces to me. I took them with a trembling, scratched-up hand and pushed them deep into my pocket, thanking him quietly before pulling myself up and limping toward the edge of the ring. Dean was still on his knees when I passed him, clutching his throat, tears and blood streaking down his face. He looked up at me, clearly bracing for me to scream, to gloat, to tell him exactly how pathetic he had become. I did not give him that satisfaction. I simply told him to tuck his chin the next time he threw an overhand, or he was going to break the small bone in his wrist, swinging like an amateur. And then I turned my back on him and walked out of that gym for good, leaving the noise and the stench and the wreckage of my family behind me. The night air outside hit me like a heavy wet blanket, and it took everything I had left just to climb into my truck and turn the key. The engine coughed and finally roared to life, and I dropped my forehead against the steering wheel as the adrenaline drained out of me all at once, leaving nothing behind but exhaustion and the deep ache of a body that had given everything it had. I reached into my pocket and felt the torn pieces of that deed between my fingers, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I understood that my grandfather's house was finally, truly safe. The next morning the sky had turned the color of bruised iron, a summer storm rolling in fast and heavy. I stood at the counter of the local hardware store, buying nails and pressure-treated lumber, every small movement sending a fresh wave of pain through my chest. The old man behind the register looked up, saw the dark bruise blooming across my cheek, and asked gently if I had taken another bad fall off the porch ladder. I told him yes, and he shook his head, telling me softly that I could not keep carrying the whole weight of everything by myself. I did not correct him. I simply took my change, carried the lumber out to the truck, and drove home to finish the work I had started. I spent that afternoon back on the porch, climbing the same wobbly stepladder, driving nail after nail into fresh wood with a hammer that felt heavier than it had the day before. I was not thinking about Dean or Kayla, or the family I had just watched fall apart on a boxing mat. I was thinking about the roof over my head and the fact that for the first time in years, nobody was coming to take it away from me. I drove the last nail flush into the wood as thunder rolled somewhere far off in the distance, and I lowered my aching arm and finally let myself breathe. The real fight was never really about that ring, and it was never about proving anything to a brother who had already made his choice long before that night. It was about learning that some people will only ever see you as something to use, and that the moment you stop bending for them is the moment you finally get to stand up straight. I picked up my tools that morning and every morning after, and I built my own peace one nail at a time, in a world that had spent years trying to convince me I did not deserve to have any at all.